Hey, my name's Jon Jon. I go by the Happy Urbanist online. You may have seen some of my videos or my really strong opinions. But today we're going to be talking about the public realm. And the public realm is the space you enter whenever you leave a building. So the public realm is the space between buildings. And I want to talk about the perspectives that shape the public realm and in turn, how the public realm shapes us. And if you look at these two different pictures, you see two different public realms. One, we spend a lot of money to go vacation at, and the other is a nondescript place that could be almost anywhere in America. In fact, this image was taken from a meme talking about how, why don't kids go outside anymore? This is the outside we've created. I'm gonna play a really bad game with you. This game is called, which one of these is Tennessee? So 3 places, 2 of them Ohio, 1 of them Tennessee. Raise your hand if you think the first one's Tennessee. All right, some non-committing people here. Raise your hand if you think the second one. What about spot number 3? Raise your hand if you forgot to raise your hand and now you're realizing it's too late. All right. Well, here's the thing. The first one is actually Ohio. The second one is Ohio. If you guessed 3, you're actually still wrong. It also is Ohio. I lied to you about that, but you believed it in part because these are non-places. They don't have what architects and city planners would call a sense of place. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be looking at 2 perspectives that give a sense of place. And I'm actually going to give you like 3 rules that you can use to decide why you like places and why you don't like places. And they're going to be loose, but you're going to start to understand things. But also, you're going to start seeing things like how interior design speaks to this as well. So our first stop is with this guy right here. His name is Le Corbusier. He was a Swiss architect, a modernist, with the famous quote saying that homes are machines for living in. And his perspective of the city was top down, 20,000 feet high. He saw the city as a jumbled, chaotic mess that needed to be tamed. And you see that in his drawings. So whenever he planned a city, everything looked neat and orderly. He thought things like Parisian cafes were gross and belonged on the roof of buildings. And he's incredibly influential in how our cities are laid out now. There's something known as Euclidean zoning or exclusionary zoning. So in America, and for the last 60 years, we've decided that cities should be separated based on their uses. You don't want to live next to a factory, but now America is homes here, commerce over here, schools over here, everything is separate. A lot of this comes from influential thinkers in the mid-20th century, like Le Corbusier. But what this has led to is this question of a good city depending on whose perspective. Because if we take his perspective, even his solutions haven't really solved the problem. That with suburban sprawl, our cities look more chaotic than ever, but also they just don't quite work. And with this, we've decided that the best form of housing is single-family housing that requires a plot of real estate for every single house. And so our cities are getting bigger and bigger. This is one of my most fascinating images of Chattanooga that I have. That blue dot is Chattanooga in 1838. Look how big Chattanooga has grown. Also, shout out to Red Bank for incorporating and us just being like, well, whatever, we'll go around. When cities grow like this, they have problems. We have 2,500 lane miles in Chattanooga, but we only resurface 60 to 70. This means it's going to take 32 to 40 years for every road to be resurfaced. A lot of these roads start crumbling at 15 to 20. So when you look at it and you realize part of the reason that our infrastructure is failing across the country is that we're too sprawled out. Nashville is 13 times the size of Barcelona, but with the same size population. That's 13 times more roads, power lines, sewer lines, and this causes a real problem. So we're going to reject that perspective, and we're going to accept the perspective of the OG, Jane Jacobs. Now, Jane Jacobs said, when we call a place interesting, we almost always mean from the point of view of a pedestrian, someone walking at human speed on their feet. And I'm actually going to take this a step further and add some extracurriculars here. When we say that a place is safe, when we say that a place is fun, when we say that it is accessible, insert whatever word you want, we almost always mean from the point of view of a pedestrian. You will drive in your car through places that don't feel safe for you or don't feel enjoyable to you, but your car in a way almost feels like you're teleporting. You have no experience with those transient places, but as a pedestrian you do. So let's talk about sense of place. I'm going to give you 3 main things for judging a place. 2 bonus ones, and then we're going to look at some places here in Chattanooga to put them to the test. The first one is a sense of enclosure. We like places that make us feel safe, and one of the main things that makes us feel safe is a sense of enclosure. So if you had a smattering of buildings like this, you would naturally see people congregate towards that. And this is why we love vacationing in places that have great public squares like this, or narrow roads and alleyways. And this has become so predictable that they actually have a formula that with roads, it's 3-to-1. You want buildings that are 3 times as high as a road is wide. With plazas, I think it's like an 8-to-1 ratio. You don't have to follow these rules, but it's pretty predictable that if you do that, you'll make places that have a strong sense of enclosure. And you can enclose with trees, like in the La Rambla in Barcelona, Spain. You can do it with buildings, both on the outsides along the streets, but inside in that example of Barcelona. You can do it with tents and markets. You can do it with glass, or the market in Rotterdam. The building literally folds in on itself, and they have a market inside of it. That's aspect number 1, enclosure. And in some ways, in interior design, this shelf is doing that same thing. It's psychologically creating a space with this concept of enclosure. The next thing is eye-level interest. You have to have fun stuff to look at. Which I don't think was a problem for Genesis because his art is everywhere. But here's the thing. If the public realm is the living room of the city, and so we are drawn to places that stimulate our senses, and eye-level interest is important to that. And so it could be an architectural detail. It could be food in a window. In the bottom right-hand corner, those are like World War II stretchers on this cool fence we saw in London where they like repurposed them. And so you have like these stories that you can tell, these things that you walk by. Eye-level interest is incredibly important in defining a place that has a good sense of place. The next thing is entrance frequency. Basically what this means is you gotta have a lot of stuff to do for different types of people. That if a place only has 1 or 2 things in which you arrive at it, it's not going to be a place you want to spend time or that you meet up with people, and you're not going to meet a lot of different people. So of course, you'll see this in markets and alleyways and streets, that it's the variety of things to do that help determine a good place. Now, these 2 ones have asterisks because they should be like, you know, it should just be going without, I shouldn't have to say this essentially, but I do want to touch on this. One, if you have all those other aspects, but it's not safe, it's not going to have a good sense of place. And then the next one is proximity and connectedness. If you have a really cool place, but there's not enough people living densely enough nearby to keep it alive, or good access for pedestrians and cyclists, it's still going to feel artificial, synthetic, and have a lot of dead time where it just isn't that lively. So let's look at some Chattanooga places. Cooper's Alley. Let's see how this passed the test, what this looks like. So Cooper's Alley, for those of you who don't know where it is, it's behind Unknown Caller. It has a strong sense of enclosure, so that's check. It has eye-level interest with the beautiful art, the sculpture that goes down. Like, it's probably some of the best examples of that in a space. However, what it lacks is entrance frequency. You're only there for certain times a day, the businesses that serve alcoholic drinks. What would really bring this place alive is if there was like a series of basement shops on the other side of like a bookstore, a tailor, a coffee shop, a donut shop, things that would bring different types of people and different types of day. Now, I'm not saying this lacks fully a sense of place. You don't have to have all 3 things, but that's something that this is missing. A good example of something that has all the traditional aspects of a sense of place is Fraser Avenue. You have eye-level interest just with the window shops themselves, but architectural details, street art, trees. You have entrance frequency, lots of things to do for different types of people. You even have a sense of enclosure with buildings lining both sides. But what you don't have, and you even have proximity to population. It's one of the most densely populated areas of Chattanooga, but you don't have this last component, which is safety. So in November, a horrific crash took the lives of 2 people and permanently injured a 3rd member of that family. But here's the thing. That's happened at that building 8 times since 2000. It's a design issue. It's not safe. Now, Monday, they're going to announce plans, hopefully to make it safer. And I think what you're going to see is something that feels like a whole different place when safety is added to that component. The next thing I want to show is Patton Square. Railroad Station is very similar. This is a design concept known as like a shared street. If you were to look at it, it does have a good sense of enclosure, like there's buildings on both sides. It has eye-level interest with art, and the enclosure is going to get better as those trees grow older. There's entrance frequency, at least on the north side, but a lot of the businesses are dead. But then I also have to put an asterisk next to entrance frequency, because on the south side, it's just a big parking garage for most of it. But what I think this lacks more than anything is that we don't actually have a lot of people that live full-time downtown, and we don't have a lot of ways for people to safely get to downtown outside of a car. So the proximity and connectedness of this is a big problem for places like Station Street near Railroad Square and Patton Square. So, gotta ask this question, why do our cities suck? Like, why do we have so many nondescript non-places in America? And it comes down to two things: how we prioritize how we move around our cities and how we prioritize shelter. The first one is like public enemy number one, Robert Moses. For those of you who don't know, he was a Parks and Rec director, probably the most influential man you've never heard of. And he essentially is responsible for, one, personally displacing 500,000 people during his career, but probably millions more by proxy as cities adopted his policies. But essentially, his perspective was another top-down one, and to him, all he had was a hammer, cars for transportation, so everything looked like a nail. And what we need to start to realize is how drastically inefficient cars are for our society. For example, this Houston interchange, which has a population of 0 people, is actually the same size of Siena, Italy, which has a population of 30,000 people. The one on top is a drain resource that we have to keep up. The other one is bringing life, culture to our country and to our community. Now, the other problem that's come up is this idea of induced demand, that as we've doubled down on cars, we've never been able to fix the traffic problem. Robert Moses would build a bridge into New York, it would max out, he'd build another one to alleviate the traffic, and traffic would go up on both bridges, the old one and the new one. And this induced demand actually is a pattern that's been witnessed since 1929, but it's basically this: the places that have the widest roads have the worst traffic. Atlanta, Houston, LA, you name it, it never gets better. And it's because of this concept of dysbiosis. Like, you've heard of symbiosis. Dysbiosis is its like evil cousin or something. But it's two mutually destructive things, because when you have a lot of people going places, parking becomes a problem. But then if you increase parking, it increases demand for people who want to go there, and traffic becomes a problem. So then you increase parking, and then you eventually end up with a downtown like Houston. This is from 1970. It's one giant parking lot. Think of what parking lots are doing to the sense of enclosure. Think of what parking lots are doing to entrance frequency and to eye-level interest. It decimates all of those things. And we know cars aren't safe just from the example of Fraser Avenue, to the tune of upwards of 43,000 people a year that die from cars, but cars also just be hitting things. Like this is a side project that nobody follows, but I literally just take pictures of stuff around town when I see it. At one point, I had in my memory 6 different car bumpers around town, and I knew exactly where they were. And I almost thought about like collecting them all and making some sort of like public art statement. But then I was just gonna get in trouble for littering, so I didn't do it. But if you start looking, you will start seeing how much cars destroy and how much infrastructure is out there just to protect us from cars destroying things. The second reason we have this problem is how we shelter. So remember this guy, he looked and said, tenements are overcrowded, we need to spread out the city. Pollution shouldn't be in proximity to people, we need to separate the uses of a city. And so, whereas cities looked something like this, he wanted everything to have its sort of own zone, to separate the uses. Now notice something, he didn't solve these problems. He just distanced us from those problems, out of sight and out of mind type of thing, and created whole new problems. Because if you were to leave your house to grab coffee, before you dropped your kid off at school, before you went to work, and came back to get your kid at school, to go to soccer practice or hang out with friends at the park and come home, you might end up driving 20 miles in a day, and you got to realize that those 20 miles, you're causing traffic for other people. When you're stuck in traffic, the old adage is, you're not in traffic, you are traffic. And so what this did is drastically increase the amount of miles every single errand requires. And so now all we're doing is getting in each other's way. The other thing is that despite whatever intended purposes people say for this has been weaponized since the post-war era to increase racial segregation, to put into place laws that are prejudiced, especially against minorities. And I want to show you case in point in Chattanooga itself. So the highway comes in the 1960s. They're going to have to run it through town. And so this is it. And essentially, they're going to create an inside and outside. So before I even looked into this, I was like, I bet I can know what's going to be on the inside, and I bet I can know what's going to be on the outside. But also, similar to Robert Moses, you got to look at where the path was laid. This is Robert Moses bulldozing full neighborhoods in New York to build his highways. So you got to ask, what communities were bulldozed for this? Eastridge, West Side, Hill City. Traditionally diverse minority communities that were bulldozed in order to make this. So much so that the city just got $2 million to help rectify this, specifically with the West Side. So we'll see what they do. Other cities, I think, have done a really good job with that money. But also, let's look at where we shelter. In the 1930s and 40s, we built two socialized housing communities. One, East Lake Courts, it's on the outside. And College Hill Courts, it's also on the outside. And if you go to College Hill Courts and you walk down MLK, which is the way you access the city, there is a sidewalk that the city wants you to take that's very long and out of the way. And then there are desire paths, trumped down grass that shows that people need access to those resources and they're risking their lives even though the city hasn't made a way for them. In fact, last year was the most dangerous year on record for pedestrians in Chattanooga. About 5 of those pedestrians died on the interstate or highway. And this became talking points for local officials and the police saying, people shouldn't be on these roads. But let's say you live here and 400 feet away is your grocery store, Food City on 23rd Street. Are you going to walk 2 miles to get there if you don't have a car? Are you going to wait 2 hours to figure out a bus route that gets you there? Or are you going to risk it and walk across? So in a way, the disadvantaged people that died last year, the city tried to create a narrative, this is a freak accident, they were in the wrong. Well, it was this road doing what it was intended to do back in the day. Now, I don't want to leave you on that note, so I'm going to give you some examples of hope and what's happening around the country. It might be hard to see, but in Rochester, New York, they completely replaced the highway with parks and housing. So on the right, you see what the highway looked like. Now you see it's full of housing and vibrant and full of life. Because of our zoning patterns, we've basically said anything other than a single-family house is usually illegal in 90% of the city. This means the few places where it is legal to make dense housing, downtowns, get really tall, and then the rest gets really spread out. So there's this thing called missing middle housing. This is the duplexes, the triplexes, the small apartment courts, and things of that nature. And what we're seeing is small strides towards building out more missing middle housing. So Justin from C&E is here. C&E does a lot of missing middle housing. It's too little, too late. It's too slow, and it's still being gatekept by our city council. They have to make a decision about every single thing that goes in. But this is something that's happening. When you see someone build a mother-in-law suite behind their house, because it's now legal near downtown, you should look at that property and say it just doubled its efficiency. It housed 1 person, now it houses 2 families. The last thing is we're seeing a trend towards what are known as complete streets. 20 to 40% of the public domain is given to cars in a downtown in the form of roads. People aren't seen as welcome there. Cyclists aren't seen as welcome there. But cities starting with London and Paris, who are getting really tactical, cities in New Jersey like Jersey City and Hoboken are beginning to reclaim space. And a complete street is this: public transportation, cars, safe pedestrian pathways, multimodal pathways, or bike pathways. Monday, fingers crossed, Fraser Avenue might be one of the first examples of a complete street for 5 blocks. It's pretty pathetic. And the city's doing everything in its power to not do that. But yeah, so we'll see what's happening. But every time you see a bike lane, even if you're not a cyclist, you need to think that bike lane moves 9,000 people an hour. And in downtown, where everything's in close proximity, you want to move a lot of people. You don't want to move one person at a fast speed. So before I finish, I want to tell you a few books that have helped inform this talk. There's also a Not Just Bikes video that speaks in depth about this. So Not Just Bikes is a great YouTube channel. Like, you've heard of being blue-pilled or red-pilled. Not Just Bikes branding is orange, and there's this term for orange-pilled. Like, you'll become radicalized towards these ideas if you watch Not Just Bikes. But these are all great books that speak to this. And something new that I'm kind of putting out there, and now I have to do it because I'm telling you guys I'm doing it, is I'm going to be launching a newsletter specifically geared towards actions you can take and little concepts you can learn to start decoding your city, your neighborhood, and the place around you. So I will leave this up, but I want to end with this. Jeff Speck said that every trip you take starts and ends with you as a pedestrian. If we make a city better for pedestrians, then we'll make it better for everyone. Thank you guys so much.
Friends, we have time for a couple of questions, and I suspect Jon Jon will have answers. We're cabled and behind the bar with the microphone, so you're going to have to bring out your best drama club voice. But if y'all have questions, throw up your hand. And
what can we do?
So Tyler asked, what can we do? One of the most important things you can do is show up. I started showing up to city council like a year and a half ago because the city did something that pissed me off. And I felt like for the longest time, I was just wasting my time there. The city council members sometimes sound very patronizing towards me. They kind of roll their eyes like, this guy's gonna speak again. But what's funny is I was like, we have an open mic where we can speak for 3 minutes. I do a lot of TikTok videos. I'm just gonna write a TikTok script, and my audience are these 9 city council members and whoever's mayoral staff that's in the room. And so I would start talking about missing middle housing, a concept that they never used in the vernacular. A month ago, 4 city council members used that term, missing middle housing. They then voted down 3 different attempts to instill versions of missing middle houses, so baby steps. But the biggest thing is by showing up after Fraser Avenue happened, and I made a video, my phone was flooded with DMs, and I reached out to someone from Caleb and was like, I'm not an organizer, what do I do? And Michael from Caleb gave me some ideas. People showed up, including Cody, and we kept the mic hot at city council for over 2 hours, almost 2.5 hours. The city then took immediate action, which is almost unheard of. They did a study, and then they created 2 design plans, submitted them to the city, and then they tried to choose the weakest of the 2 plans. We then organized and voted towards the plan that they didn't want chosen, and I'm not supposed to know this, but 85% of the people voted for the right plan. So, anyways, the first thing is just showing up to these events, getting connected with organization. C&E, Justin's here. 2 Bikes is going to be launching. So bike shops like White Oak, things that increase pedestrian multimodal visibility are all great ways to get started. Also, hopefully in the newsletter, I'll have a better answer to that as well.
So good. Can I move that we chant Jon Jon, Jon Jon, while we applaud? Kate, what's up?
Yeah, great question. So I grew up in Dayton, Tennessee, and during the pandemic, we decided to move back out east, and Chattanooga always had great memories. When I got here, I realized there was sort of cracks in the facade. Arthur, I don't know where Arthur is. Arthur used that term himself when he moved here. He moved here from Belgium, that the Chattanooga you visit is different than the Chattanooga you live in. And when I sort of saw this juxtaposition, that really got me in order, speaking up about it. Last year, I went to Europe for 7 months, and everyone was just like, you're not going to want to come back. You're not going to want to come back. But I truly do love Chattanooga, both in its current state and in its potential, that as tempting as it was to live in a place that already has it figured out, it's so much more exciting to have a say in the future of something. And I think Chattanooga is one of the examples that this is going to happen in the rural South versus Seattle, Portland, or something like that. So I'm really excited about that.
Yee. There it was. All right, we got time for one more.
So, in addition to signing up for your newsletter, what can we do to help you further your cause, your initiative, help you really feel the experience?
Yeah. So if this really excites you, if this is something you're like, yes, I want to be a part of this. I don't even know what half the stuff is. You talk too fast, but I do know I want it. There's a group in town called Strong Towns, literally formed the week before the Fraser crash. And then there's a group that I work with called the Chattanooga Urbanist Society. They're two sides of the same coin. Strong Towns is a respectable, show up, make arguments, write op-eds, partner with newspapers, and Chattanooga Urbanist Society is riff-raff and get shit done. And so we will build benches and place them without the city's permission. We will see projects that need to get done. So if you follow Chattanooga Urbanist Society, direct message us, tell us you want to get involved, or just follow us. We have projects coming up. And if you're more of the respectable, influential type, strong, well, actually, you don't even have to be that. I mean, Kurt's in it, Justin's in it. You just need to show up. There's a Discord. In fact, everyone here, if you're here tonight or here today, feel free to DM me on Instagram. I like to follow interesting people that live nearby. And then if you're interested in these resources like the Strong Towns Discord or the Urbanist Society, let me know.
Hey, who thinks Jon Jon should run for public office?
Jon Jon, Jon Jon, Jon Jon, Jon Jon. And actually, I don't know what I'm saying. We actually have a little bit of time for a few more questions.
Hey, but what is your hunch? I mean, I'm curious.
Yeah. I tell people two things I'm really passionate about is like respecting the civic process and then also not giving a damn about the civic process. And here's what I mean by that is like, I feel like direct action and mutual aid should happen as if the city's not going to change anything. But then also you should show up at the city as if direct action and mutual aid amount to nothing. To answer your specific question about timeline, I am on a regular basis both encouraged and discouraged by how fast and slow things are going. Fraser Avenue happened so quickly. And here's the thing, Cherokee Street, the extension of Fraser Avenue that's owned by the city or by the state, that is getting repaved next year. What we put in place will help convince the state what happens on Cherokee. Main Street, where it's 4 lanes, so it goes from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, is getting repaved next year. It's owned by the state. What we can influence in the next 9 months could create 2 huge thoroughfares into downtown that brings opportunities to those neighborhoods. So in some ways, a year and a half from now, we could have 2 complete streets that completely unlock opportunities downtown to disenfranchise neighborhoods, but also every single win hangs by a thread. And if that doesn't happen, I was talking to someone earlier, I was like, part of what motivates me is I want Chattanooga to be safe enough for my kids to have independence before their upper levels high school to navigate downtown. And they don't have that right now. So that's my timeline. That's my goal. I've got like 6 years to do it. Please help. But also, I don't know. I have this attitude of the long game and then fighting for the short game as well. I don't know. That's not a very satisfying answer. Yes, exactly.
That's what I've heard. Y'all give it up for Jon Jon. My goodness.